the affordability of the plans that Timber Creek has for this. We're going to talk about the fact that they're not really building the same kinds of houses as are already exist here. There's currently no plans to build 4-bedroom apartments, and there are no, at least I don't think there are, and there's no 4-bedroom apartments that they could transfer people into who are living in 4-bedroom townhouses. There's some very big families in this community. I have 2 neighbors out my back door that have 10 children each. You know, there's at least 2 other ones that have between 4 and 6 children. So it's a very underhoused area of the city. They've already demolished 233 homes. And since then, homelessness and rents in Ottawa have skyrocketed. Just if anybody doesn't know where Herongate is, Herongate Village is it's where Walkley and Heron intersect. It's like this triangle of land. Cedarwood, Baycrest, and Sandalwood are the roads that sort of cut through it. It's part of the larger Herongate neighborhood. Gate is this, it's sort of like, it's this term I think that developers like to use to try to create a sense of an exclusive sort of gated community sort of area. But the reality is that there's high levels of exploitation and structural racism in this community. So Herongate Village was built from the 60s to the 1980s by Minto. It's home to around 4,000 tenants. It was owned by Transglobe, who CBC Marketplace called Canada's Worst Landlord. You can probably find that documentary still about Herongate and about Transglobe. It was acquired by Timber Creek, which is now Hazelview, in 2012-2013, and they paid just under $200 million for 1,750 units. We did the math and we divided that out, and that means that they paid about $111,000 per unit for these, for the homes in this community, which is, even adjusted for inflation now, we calculated $129,000, that you just cannot get a home for that price anywhere if you're a regular person. It's sort of this bulk buying at an epic scale, right? So this is an advantage that they had because they had the access to the money to do this. So,
and we'll see later on in the presentation that these numbers just don't add up. If the property was acquired for less than $200 million back then, and Hazelview now, since they've separated from Timber Creek Financial, Hazelview has, you know, billions of dollars in assets under management, but we're not talking about 20 billion. We're talking about, at this point, less than 10 because they separated from Timber Creek. Yet they're planning a multi-billion-dollar project here. So where are they getting the money for that? And we'll see that coming up in the slides. Yeah, so Herongate Village is so large as a rental project, a rental village, that it makes up almost an entire census tract. It's actually the largest rental area in the entire city of Ottawa, after Bayshore, which is now called Akora Village, which was also built by Minto around the same time, but was kept sort of in the Minto family, whereas Herongate was sold off. Because it is its own census tract, we're able to get very specific data for the neighborhood, and it has the highest level of, quote, visible minorities. That's a term used by StatsCan in Ottawa, and you can correlate this with the highest level of core housing need, which is sort of a metric that combines a bunch of different factors, including underhousing, suitability of the housing, the state of repair of the housing. And so Herongate represents the highest level of this core housing need metric in the city. And it is the second highest level of poverty, a census tract with the second highest level of poverty. So this is what we mean when we talk about structural racism. And it's the crux of the human rights case, which of course you'll hear more about later as well. So in Ottawa, as I'm sure many people are aware, there is a rent crisis, there's an eviction crisis. These are all, and the city is fully aware. These are quotes pulled directly from a report from Housing Services the director of housing services, presented to city council. And so Saeed Saya, the director of housing services, in his report told city council that rent increases have, gone through the roof. And we can see here, the highest demand is for units with 3 or more bedrooms. Exactly what Hazelview has demolished up until now and what they plan to continue demolishing. And this has increased by 20% since 2019 and continues to climb. This is unfathomable, and it supports the argument that market rents are not affordable rents. And market rents, as we'll see later, are what Hazelview is using to determine, quote, affordability. Other quotes in this report: the vacancy rates have increased, so it sort of pokes holes in the common developer line that we need more supply, the fact is vacancy rates are higher now than they have really ever been. The centralized waiting list for people waiting for a subsidy received over 3,000 applicants in 2020 alone. And most of those, a big chunk of those people are experiencing homelessness, and the entire list is over 12,000 people in Ottawa. So, it's pretty common knowledge that it's years and years and years to get subsidized housing because there is a rent crisis in Ottawa.
Hi, everyone. I just want to make sure that you can all hear me okay. Good. Yeah. Awesome. So I'm Nima. I'm also part of the Herongate Tenant Coalition. And so this section talks about dumb evictions in Herongate. So when we talk about Timber Creek, now known as Hazelview, we wanted to discuss their plans and how it works specifically in the Herongate village. So Hazelview plans to demolish another 559 townhouses and low-rise apartment units. They've already so far demolished 233 townhouse units during the last 2 dumb eviction phases, which we saw between September to February 2015 to 2016 and May to October 2018. And if we can go to the next slide, it kind of shows the preliminary phasing strategy of the master plan of Herongate. So if you look at the blue area highlighted in the first phase 1 map, that's the area where the first 2016 dumb eviction occurred. So we saw about 80 townhomes be razed to the ground, the families that live there be evicted. And from then on, Hazelview or Timber Creek has now been constructing luxury apartment condos in their wake that are supremely unaffordable. In the green highlighted section of the same phase 1 plan, that's where between May to October 2018, we saw sort of the bulk of the demolishings happen in the last couple of years. And so far, these have made up the 233 townhomes that have been demolished and leaving hundreds without a home and a community in Herongate. Within these next couple maps that you'll see in the next slide as well, this will show you kind of the phasing as it continues to go along. So I could tell you right now that where I live is highlighted in these maps as well. Where Tammy lives is also highlighted. Not to air you out, Tammy, or anything like that, but it does show that so far, this is a really vast project that is so apparently a multi-billion-dollar project that Hazelview Timber Creek is willing to put down. But as we see later on, these projects are not set in stone, and we're able to force them to kind of adhere to what tenants want, as we'll see continuing on. So we can go to the next slide, unless Tammy, Josh, you want to add anything?
I'll just say that this is the number, right? This is 559 units, 87 for this demolition zone on the left, 339 in this central area of Herongate. And then the final area is 133. That's 559 more units. So it is all the remaining townhouses and low-rise buildings that they plan to demolish, all of which are currently below Ottawa market rents. So they are more affordable than Ottawa's own affordability.
Yeah.
Metric.
And you look at the thousands of people that currently live there and are at this point in time facing precarious housing situations, increased risk of homelessness, while the city kind of isn't really helping out at all. And we're at another slide, and this slide kind of shows the phases as they continue. So I'm actually very colorblind. This is rough, but we see the pale beige is phase 1 complete, phase 2 in the next 5 to 10 years, phase 3 to 8 continuing on. And we've heard that they are to be determined, but Hazelview has kind of made it clear that the lifespan of this project is going to be 25 years, maybe more.
And again, the inconsistencies here between their planning documents show that their plans are just plans. They're just theoretical at this point. There's nothing set in stone. They're trying to get the city to back them up, to intimidate tenants, to spin a PR story here. But as we see here, phase 8, the dark purple, and going back to the other one here, this is the second phase here is for demolition. So we don't know what they're planning. If they're planning to just demolish and leave it vacant until the very end. You know, they demolished the 150 townhouses a few years ago, and that field is still empty. Why? Why was there pressure put on people, like an inordinate amount of pressure put on people to move when there was no deadline for construction? There, you know, they knew they would be tied up in whatever processes were happening.
Yeah, and so this forces the people that live in this community to live with this uncertainty, right? There's literally possibly decades of uncertainty ahead for the people that live in this community. That's the stress of this it cannot be overstated, right? Like it's so important to recognize how stressful the threat of losing your home is, and to live for years with that hanging over your head. It's not a situation that anybody really wants to be in. And that's what thousands of people are going to be living through in this community for the next 2 decades, possibly. So the memorandum of understanding between the City of Ottawa and Hazelview, it outlines their commitment to affordable housing, and the council approved their official plan amendment to add more units than the current zoning for this part of the city would allow. This is a public relations move and a pressure tactic. That's what this is. They still plan to demolish all the townhouses and low-rise buildings, including my home. I live in a home that is, going to be destroyed, and their plan is to only keep the 5 apartment towers. Yeah. I
will say on September 8th, so the MOU was amended on September 8th. At that same city council meeting, the mayor made an announcement of supposedly the city's biggest financial commitment to affordable housing of $15 million, which is obviously like a very small number, but it was still the largest amount ever that the city is committing to affordable housing. On the same day, they signed an agreement with Hazelview to demolish affordable housing. This is this vicious cycle, right? This of demolition, again, the city of Ottawa is the only city in the country to have escalated from a housing crisis to a housing emergency. So demolition, declarations, more funding, more demolition, more declarations, more funding. It's just a snake eating its own tail. So this is their affordability plan. We're getting into it now, the numbers, okay? So they have 2 different sets of definitions for affordability. In those 5 apartment towers, their plans say they will keep, they are going to designate 510 of those units as, quote, affordable. These buildings are decades old. You know, there are 3 bedrooms in maybe 2 of the buildings or 1 of the buildings. There aren't a lot of 3 bedrooms, and there are no 4-bedroom units. There's a total of 957 units across these buildings, 510 of them, again, designated as affordable. That's like 53% or something. And their metric for affordability here is using Ottawa market rents. That's it. It's not 80% of Ottawa market. It's not 90%. It is just Ottawa market rents. Herongate is already renting at below market. We can see their numbers here that they presented for 2020. Of course, this will increase every year, as you know, we saw a 20% increase for 3 and 4 bedroom units in 1 year. 1-bedroom apartments, according to this designation, will be set at $1,244, 2 bedrooms $1,514, and 3 bedrooms at $1,850. people in 3 and 4 bedroom townhouses are paying between $1,400 and $1,500 for a townhouse with yards and basement and maybe a garage. And we'll see a graphic straight from CMHC, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. They do a market rental report, and that's where they got their numbers.
And the new builds are going to be even less affordable. Correct? This is the new construction. And again, they're using the average Ottawa income, which is close to $100,000. And they're saying that affordable is for you to spend 1/3 of your income, or 30% of your income on your rent or on your housing. And so based on, but the reality is that Herongate has an average household income of about $40,000, which is less than half of the typical income for the city of Ottawa. City of Ottawa even acknowledges that we have one of the highest average household incomes in the country. And so they acknowledge that it's an outlier, that Ottawa is something of an outlier with a much higher average income, but they're still going to use those numbers to calculate what is this company sort of meeting their obligations to provide affordable housing, when their idea of affordable is completely out of reach for the people that currently live here.
Yeah. And again, these are detailed numbers. $40,000 as an average household income is from the 2016 census. And it focuses specifically on the neighborhood because it is so large, and it encompasses one census tract, so we can get specific data for the neighborhood. And so on the right-hand side here, this is a screenshot directly from the MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, that Hazelview signed with the city. So we can see their numbers for, they call them affordable existing, which is affordable units from the 5 apartment towers. And it matches up with a screenshot on the left from CMHC's market rent report. And so on this side, like Tammy said, this is on the left-hand side, this is a screenshot from the City of Ottawa's website, where it shows that Ottawa has the second highest family income in the country. Our people, our low-income people in Ottawa are making just as little as anybody else in the country, yet they're basing affordability for their new unit off a family income that is the second highest in the country. And so again, a screenshot from their MOU shows that according to the criteria they're using, a household in a 1-bedroom apartment is supposed to be making $59,000 a year. So they take 30% of that, right? A household in a 3-bedroom should be making $92,000 a year. Whereas in fact, the average income in Herongate is closer to what here is for a bachelor. So it should be closer to around $1,000 a month, right? The average rent in Herongate, if it was truly affordable.
So this is a screenshot of Hazelview Properties Facebook pages, and it kind of shows the way that they've now been emboldened to describe their housing as affordable and designated as affordable housing after they've come to an understanding with City Council about the Memorandum of Understanding. And if you look at the post, it says, a commitment to affordable housing. Our Herongate development plan puts people first with a commitment to over 1,000 affordable residential units. And the thing is, people in Ottawa aren't really being fooled by this. They are very upset in the comments. So we see someone, we should have blurred out names. We see someone saying, what is your interpretation of affordable residential units? Last time I checked, an average individual working at Walmart, McDonald's, in the service industries, or even Amazon, when their take-home pay is less than $2,000 a month. So again, I ask, what is your interpretation of affordable residential units? And if you check out more of Hazelview's pages, you will see folks in Ottawa who are kind of realizing that the wool is being pulled over our eyes in this moment, and that the housing in Herongate is not going to be affordable in 10 years and 15 years. The rent continues to go up because the property management company knows that they can force out working class people of color and get in a more affluent, a more white kind of clientele. And we can go ahead to the next slide.
And so this ad that they just launched just over a week ago, it is to create the image of affordability. Hazelview's main source of revenue comes from investors, primarily institutional investors like pension funds. And they need to present an image, a certain image to their investors, right? Something that is attractive. What are investors looking at? They're looking at brochures, they're looking at investment packages from their investment managers, stuff like that. They're not coming on the ground and seeing the neighborhood for what it really is. And this is why curb appeal is so important, which we'll see in a second as well. But the PR strategy is increasingly being used by these financialized landlords like Hazelview, largely because tenants are pushing back, right? People are starting to organize, working class people are starting to organize in neighborhoods across Ontario, across the country, and are revealing to the public what these landlords are doing and how they're making their money. But the main way they reposition a neighborhood is through tenant rollover. Again, creating an image of sort of generating value or like developing new value from a neighborhood by changing its characteristics and presenting that to investors. Right? We spent $200 million on this project, but look, we've tapped all this value from it. We're sucking value. We're sucking the neighborhood dry for value. And for landlords like Hazelview, even vacant units can have more value than occupied ones. And this is obvious in Toronto, where the West Lodge Towers, which are owned by Hazelview, there are hundreds of units being held empty there. And in Herongate, Tammy can tell you.
It's been, so last year, the eviction moratorium ended in November when there was a moratorium on all evictions because of the pandemic. It ended in November, and there's two townhouses just like mine, like little houses, exactly like the one I live in. One had a family that had lived in it for a long time, and the other was just a pair of young women. They were roommates, and those two houses were emptied out in November. That family left, those two young women left, and those houses have sat empty for the last year, and the windows were left open. They've been open for a year. The windows were just left open. So there's a house literally connected to mine, because they're row houses, that's just been left open to rot for the last year. And there were people living in it until it was left like that. And it's sitting there empty, and so is the other one.
Yeah, and this is a screenshot pulled straight from their website, their investor website. So hazelviewinvestments.com, not Hazelview Properties. But Hazelview Properties is sort of just the property management company. That's all it is. Their in-house property management. So you can see here, straight from their website, value is achieved through improved management, operational efficiencies, and cosmetic enhancements. That's what they do. Many of our property investments allow us to improve the population density. They're clearly talking about Herongate. Herongate is, no question, their biggest asset, absolutely, their biggest project. And it's interesting because the top executives have avoided even mentioning it until recently, when they've had to do major damage control. But all throughout 2018, when that big battle went down, the big executives, they kept it at a distance. And here it says value is created through entitlement and redevelopment development strategies. So entitlement is the process of basically working through government red tape, obtaining permits and zoning, stuff like that. And again, it's this cycle that they're creating an image of affordability that is not based on anything in reality whatsoever, to be able to present to their investors. And the fact is they don't even rely on rent collection as a primary source of revenue. Their main revenue comes from if you do the math, the amount of money they make from rent is pennies, especially for such a large scale development like this. So they don't even care about rent, really. So why are they not they could still do affordable rent and not lose money. But again, it's about the image of luxury, of a new demographic. And well, here it's the crux of the human rights case.
So one of the things that Hazelview has done to upgrade, they talk about how in September 2015, they released a press release that describes how they've spent over $20 million in capital expenditures. In 2019, they've upped the price to $50 million. And in 2021, Hazelview has invested over $175 million in Herongate community since taking over the property in 2012. And that really makes us wonder, where is this money going? Because we're not really seeing it being poured into housing. We're not seeing housing really being upgraded or even maintained in any really great sort of way. So we can talk about curb appeal. And that's when it comes to glass balconies, cosmetic upgrades, lobbies, elevators, interiors, operational efficiencies, so greenwashing, energy efficiencies, cutting costs. And then also in terms of like renovating a party center, a fitness center, making sure that this is a really, really appealing site to invest for investors. But for folks who actually live here, they're not seeing any type of improvement, but they're also still paying for the cost of it. So we often see that in AGIs as well, in above guideline rent increases, when folks have to pay for, lighting in the lobby to be fixed up, for footing the bill for balconies to be refurnished with glass instead of concrete, things that bring in investors. And so the company is spending significant capital on first impression curb appeal upgrades to lobbies and corridors. And we can go to the next slide. So then that makes us, again, wonder, where is this multi-billion-dollar development or investment in Ottawa coming from? Because in the caption here, it says a multi-billion-dollar development will transform South Ottawa's Herongate community and triple or even quadruple its population during the next 2 decades. When Timber Creek has been spending less than $200 million on the property, again, they're projected to spend billions. But the construction of the 3 new buildings is projected to cost $120 million. And so construction costs alone for Vista Locale were about $73 million. It makes us wonder and ask a lot of questions about, where is that money going? Where is it coming from? And how come residents in this area are still struggling with housing if we're projected to see billions of dollars be poured into the development? And we can hit the next slide. So we look at Vista Locale, which, if you remember from the first kind of map, it's the phase that was the first one that was demolished, and now it's been constructed. And with this image of luxury apartment rentals. And in this area, if you look at the flyer here, you can see that it's very much a resort style apartment. It's apparently recreation over renovation. It's very much an image of a white affluent population. We've heard, executives in Timber Creek talk about, wouldn't it be so great to have a cute little cafe in the lobby of this new development here? And we heard that and we were like, yes, maybe a cafe would be great, but you're evicting children and elderly people to have your cafe here. We've seen 100% luxury rent be implemented in these 348 units that have been built in the last few years. And we're seeing a live repositioning from the neighborhood being core Herongate, from being what we know as Herongate Village, to instead being an almost hyper-extended version of Alta Vista, which is just down the road and is really well known as a very, middle class, upper middle class area, compared to the other side of the ward that it's in, Herongate, which is very working class, very exploited. Yeah.
Is there anything you want to add, Tammy?
Nope.
Okay, so a big part of their justification for their MOU and their PR campaign is this community well-being framework, which their architecture firm Dialogue, based out of Toronto, developed in partnership with the Conference Board of Canada, which is a think tank based in Ottawa. So Dialogue was coming to Ottawa to develop this. And this is a ridiculous quote from Antonio Gomez Palacio, who is the head architect basically behind the Herongate project in Vista Local. He just says, we get one lifetime to change the world, to make it a better place, blah, blah, blah. I choose city building by engaging in people in meaningful conversation. So their framework, they've developed this community well-being wheel, which, is basically just common sense. But But this framework, it's like an evaluation tool for neighborhoods, and they're applying it to their developments, right? Their plans. And then they're like scoring their plans based on this wheel. They're not applying it to the existing neighborhood. So we have to ask ourselves why. They're sort of caught between a rock and a hard place. If they apply it to the neighborhood and it comes out bad, it's a low score for Herongate, what are they saying about the neighborhood? That it's no good, that all the networks of support that people have are not valued, they don't score high on this, then that sort of, pokes holes in this wheel. If it scored high, then they would have a hard time justifying why they're destroying it. So they're really stuck here, but it's very clear that, they're picking and choosing where they want to, where they want to lay down these terms of, community and resilience and support systems, all the things around this wheel. And so this is a screenshot from their community framework. At the end, one of the appendices is a return on investment. So if you design according to this framework, you can see certain returns on investment. Here it actually says, you can't spell it out more plainly, more clearly than this. Increase the quantity and quality of the lower wage labor pool. Increases worker fitness and reduces sick leave. We need people to fill those big Amazon warehouses, right? Well, that's what Hazelview is planning. But there is a way forward, and obviously these are conversations that take place in the neighborhood and are ongoing. But Osgood Street and Sandy Hill, a big rooming house, tenants organized. The landlord was trying to rent evict them. They fought back. They worked together. They brought the landlord to the table, and they were able to stay. They were able to bring the landlord to a compromise, and there's a number of tenants still on the property.
Yeah, so this is just another demonstration of how their plan is it's very nebulous, right? It's very changing and just changes all the time because there's been this drastic change in the size of a lot of these buildings. There was originally a 40-story building, 35 stories. They were much bigger and they've made them much smaller. And it just sort of demonstrates the stress that it forces the people in the community to live under while this is happening, that we don't even know what's going to happen around us. And there's no way to sort of, it's the stress of uncertainty is, it's really crushing. Yeah.
And look, a flip of a switch, they can go from 40 stories to 25 stories, from 35 stories to 25. From 25 to 20, like it just shows that their plans are, sort of floating. Like there's nothing concrete there. They can be changed. They absolutely can be. And people are the ones who make history. And, there's no reason the world's not going to end if Hazelview doesn't move ahead with this project as they have it on paper. It's already changed multiple times. It can continue to change.
Okay, so this slide, I just want to say that we're cutting into our time really, really close. So I think we have to speed it up a little bit so we can get Nick up in here. But this map shows the Herongate Village area. It also shows 1770 Hetherington Road, which is a patch of green grass that you'll notice has kind of been highlighted there. And so 1770 Hetherington Road, 3.2 hectares, decommissioned City Public's workyard, 400 meters from the demoviction areas that we've seen from 2018 to 2016. The city has planned for family-oriented affordable housing to be built in this area. It's also stated that it has no plan to be used as restitution for demevicted families in the last couple of years. That's a really interesting thing that the city has said, although that the housing plan there ranges from 168 to 322 housing units, and the city could easily house folks from this area over there. But they have in the past said that they do not intend to, despite the housing being actually almost identically similar. It just was owned and built at one point by a different corporation. Josh, Tammy, anything to add?
No.
So yeah, if we go to the next slide, the houses here have been described by the company as beyond its building life cycle, no longer viable. We have known these to be buzzwords that are used by corporations, housing corporations, to continue using housing as a vehicle of profit so that they can demo-evict these areas, tear the housing down, build up more expensive housing and get a different type of clientele in. Tammy, Josh, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, it's just, there are so many communities that were built at the same time in the same way by the same company, but because they're owned by people, no one would ever say that they're beyond their life cycle, that they're no longer viable, right? This is only because they're no longer profitable for a company. That's what this means. So
absolutely, these are economic terms. These have nothing to do with the quality of the homes. And we can see right across the street again. So there's 1770 Hetherington, and then right across the street from 1770 Hetherington, we have this exact same style of housing, mansard style housing, built at the exact same time. These houses were built by Urbandale. They were lower end of market rentals for over 3 decades, but they were renovated. Sure, they're condos now. It's not ideal. Many people did get displaced when they were converted to condos, but it shows that any narrative that Hazelview tries to continue to push, that the housing is beyond repair, it doesn't hold any water.
yeah, so now I think we'll turn it over to the lawyers so they can give you an update on our various legal cases.
Yeah, first we'll hear from Nick. Nick, are you here?
Yes. Yes. Hi, Josh.
Hey.
Okay. You ready for me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks to you and Tammy and Nima for the invitation. I'm just one of the lawyers that's working on some of the cases that are ongoing. I'm an associate with Hameed Law, and I work with Yavar Hameed. And we also partner and work with Daniel Tucker-Simmons of Avant Law. And I'm going to be discussing 2 of the small claims matters that are ongoing currently. And I'll defer any conversation and explanation relating to the Human Rights Tribunal application to Daniel, since Daniel's the one who has the primary lead on that file. So it's been really important work that we've undertaken in relation to these 2 small claims matters on 2 separate issues. So the first one would have been a housing unit with a family that used to live in it in the Herongate community was deliberately, as Josh and the rest of the coalition described tonight, was deliberately left to become dilapidated. And it flooded. Timber Creek failed to renovate it, and we decided that we would bring a novel claim before the small claims court on the basis that, owing to Timber Creek's failure to maintain and repair the unit, the tenants of the unit suffered what in legal terms we'll call a deprivation, and Timber Creek then was able to become enriched unjustly as a result of having to not repair that unit. So that would be sort of the basis of one of the cases. The second one has to do more with defamation, where Timber Creek wanted to try and sow discord amongst the advocacy work of the coalition by spreading falsehoods about a number of the members of the coalition in order to cause confusion and distrust among the advocacy efforts there. And what we wanted to do is bring the case in defamation to demonstrate that there are consequences for advancing falsehoods in such a fashion. So despite the fact that these cases are factually and legally quite unique and different from each other, different causes of action giving rise to these cases, the counsel that Timber Creek has hired have basically employed quite similar strategies in order to defend against those claims. And essentially what they're trying to do is put in place procedural hurdles that will slow us down, will cost us more money, will force us to research more, to hire different experts, and become more aggressive and able to ensure that we can actually continue to fight these cases and ensure that we have a chance to go before a judge and actually argue these cases on the merits. So in both of these cases, Timber Creek's, the firm representing Timber Creek, has brought motions to strike the actions for various different reasons. And basically what that forces the coalition and we as lawyers representing the coalition to do is to really shore up a lot of research and resources and effort to prepare to defend against those motions to make sure that they were not prematurely struck out. And that's what we did. This in back when, before the pandemic, when the small claims court was operating a lot more smoothly, we had to put in place a lot of effort for both of these cases to ensure that they weren't struck out. We went before a judge of the small claims court, and in both cases we were successful, and which meant that they're still ongoing. It's quite unfortunate right now, just because of the pandemic, the sort of proceedings before the small claims court have sort of crawled to a halt almost. Because what I was personally very much looking forward to, we had a trial scheduled for 4 days in October of 2020. We had expert reports prepared, we had witness statements prepared, we had our documents prepared, we were ready to go, and still are ready to go. But it's just means that we're waiting for scheduling and we're ready to go once we get those dates. But it remains to be seen when that's going to be happening, unfortunately. And there is some movement on the with the defamation matters, but again, it's just we're sort of at the whim of the folks who are scheduling these matters with the small claims court. But so needless to say, we're doing our best. It's taken a lot to make sure that we can sustain these actions because they have hired high-priced firms who know the sort of these standard tactics to stymie the efforts of the underdogs who don't necessarily have the resources to go through all these procedural and administrative hurdles. But we've got this far, and we're pretty confident we can come out on top on the other side.
Awesome.
I'm not sure if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, it's an update. So things are ongoing. They've been ongoing for a very long time. Everything has just taken so long, especially with COVID. There are more delays, but yeah, like Nick said, we're still ready to go. And I think Yavar is here now. Did you want to speak, Yavar?
I'm not sure. I know he was juggling. Sorry, he was juggling a few things today.
Yeah, you're there. You're just muted. Oh, you can't unmute yourself. You're not. Yeah, sorry. There we go.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Josh. I just want to say, what an honor and privilege it is to work with the folks at Herongate and to be involved in this case. We started the small claims case where Timber Creek was bringing a motion to have the matter deferred to the landlord tenant board. And that is among the various tactics. It's one of the tactics to put it in the realm where it's really commonplace for landlords to either defer matters, to have them cast as issues of rent abatement, or perhaps defer them and to make them non-issues. And one of the I think successful parts of our action that Nick described in unjust enrichment was to keep it in the small claims court and really to put the issue front and center as one of Timber Creek capitalizing from the financial deprivation, economic deprivation, and the terrible conditions that they're enforcing. And so it will be interesting to see how the small claims court treats that issue. But the other thing that's interesting about it is that these larger issues that the coalition and others have been talking about in terms of eviction, that's really the underpinning of this case. So whichever way it goes, we've put that case as best we can before the courts, and we wouldn't be able to do this without the organizing efforts of the coalition. So just really want to thank them for their tremendous work and a lot of the thought and analysis that goes into these issues. So I would say that would be one of the cases to watch for, because whatever the court might do on this, we're really trying to translate this this phenomenon of demevictions into some way in which tenants can be vindicated and have some compensation.
Amazing, thank you, Yavar. Yeah, Yavar and Nick have done phenomenal work, and we've had really good conversations about how to craft these cases as strategically and strongly as possible. But absolutely, if it wasn't for all the organizing that really took place from 2018 and ongoing, and the documentation, tenants being extremely organized and keeping troves of work orders, allowing taking photographs, documenting all of that, none of these cases would be possible. Daniel, you're here, right?
Hey everyone. First off, thanks Josh, Tammy, and Nima for organizing this event. The whole case wouldn't be, it just wouldn't exist. All the cases wouldn't exist without the Herongate Tenant Coalition and the really persistent dedication of its members, and of course the residents themselves and the applicants, some of whom are here today, I see. So thanks everyone, and thanks also to Nick and Yavar, who, not in addition to handling their own case, have been helping with the case that I'm primarily responsible for, which is the case before the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario. That case, in a nutshell, is what we're alleging in that case is that the mass forced eviction of a large number of residents from a racialized community constitutes racial discrimination that violates the Human Rights Code of Ontario. For those of you who are unfamiliar or haven't heard of the Human Rights Code of Ontario, what the Human Rights Code does is it prohibits discrimination of various kinds, racial discrimination, sex discrimination, disability discrimination, discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender expression, etc. A whole bunch of different forms of discrimination. Prohibits those forms of discrimination in certain areas of life, in certain facets of life. One of the main ones being housing, rental housing, and so that's the general principle. In this case, what we're, to us, to anyone looking at this, probably to everyone here, you look at what Timber Creek did, and it really, it's obviously, to me, it's obviously discriminatory. You've targeted an area that is, but according to Stats Can statistics, is 70% racialized, and then the residents that were evicted in the 2018 round of evictions were actually 90% racialized. And so you've moved in, you've purchased an area that is very racialized, and your first order of business is to start evicting people en masse. And to me, it's obvious that there's a link between the evictions and the racial and social composition of the community. This kind of thing doesn't happen in an all-white community, right? Like that's across the board. We don't see something like this in Westboro or in, this isn't happening in the Glebe or in Centertown. This is happening in Herongate because it's racialized. Now, it's one thing to recognize that and to know that on an intuitive level, but the funny thing is sometimes it can be more difficult to prove that in a legal forum. And that's the challenge that we face in this case. And that's what this case is really about. Because what Timber Creek says, and what Timber Creek is going to argue is, no, we don't, we would love it if all of the former residents came and started renting from us. We would love it if the whole, we don't care. We're glad if the whole community stays 70% racialized or 90% racialized. That would be great to us. We don't care what the racial composition of the community is, as long as they're paying the rents, right? We don't care where the money comes from. And so, of course, we're not racist. How could you call us racist? We're actually, we're offended. We're offended by that allegation. They to me, that's, I don't, to me, that's obviously not, to me, that's a disingenuous defense. But legally, you have to recognize that what they're saying has some merit, and that's where there's a real, we do have an uphill battle in this case, because we have to establish a link between the racial composition in the neighborhood and and the evictions themselves. We have to be able to convince the tribunal, the Human Rights Tribunal, that the reason that this neighborhood was selected and that these residents were expelled was because they were racialized, not necessarily intentionally, right? Like, it doesn't have to be. We're not talking about apartheid South Africa here. We're not saying that that Timber Creek has some kind of master plan to socially engineer the neighborhood for racial reasons or something like that. But they're really, to me, when you look at the evidence, the social science evidence, the statistical evidence, and the economic evidence, there's a really compelling case that the reason that this community was selected is because it's racialized, right? And I think we can prove that. I think we're going to be able to prove that. There are a lot of reasons for that. The way that we can show, historically and also, across Canada, racialized communities are the ones that are targeted for this type of development disproportionately. They're disproportionately likely to be subject to this form of predatory development, where the community is evicted entirely and then replaced by a much more predominantly white population. There historically, a lot of these types of evictions would have been carried out by a state, by a municipality. For example, there's the famous one in Africville in Halifax, which I think was in the 50s, which one of our experts has written about. But more recently, this type of mass eviction happens because it's very profitable to target these communities. It's enormously profitable. If you can acquire, Josh and Tammy and Nima went over the really compelling statistics that I think illustrate why this is so profitable to do. When you look at what it costs Timber Creek per housing unit to purchase the properties, it's astonishingly low. And to me, a significant portion, and I think, and we can prove this, I think we'll be able to prove this, a significant portion, a significant contributing factor to that really low cost is the fact that the people there were racialized. It's the fact that people with money, people that are white and white passing, are much more reluctant to move to that neighborhood to purchase property there because it's a racialized neighborhood, and that is a consequence of systemic racism, of racism on a larger scale. It's also a consequence of the fact that racialized people and people of color are more generally excluded and do not have the same types of opportunities. And so, of course, they have less resources and they don't have the resources to purchase those properties in the same way. And there's a huge disparity in wealth between, when you look at the income gap between racialized people and white people, there's a very significant income gap, but even more significant is the difference in wealth accumulation, because people of color have been excluded historically for so long, and white people have been accumulating wealth for such a long period of time. They're able to over generations inherit wealth that they then use to increase their wealth by buying property. See you later, Nick. Thanks so much. And then, of course, through asset price inflation, they get in the market and then they make all kinds of money on the increase in value. But people of color don't have that opportunity, so they're disproportionately renting. And in areas where they live, like Herongate, there's a high proportion of renters, much less home ownership, and just not the ability to purchase those houses. And so what we see in Herongate is kind of the coalescing of a number of coalescing of a number of factors or consequences of racism that that depress housing prices and depress rents. And so what makes it profitable to remove everybody in a case like this is that if you can do what Timber Creek did, and you can acquire the property all at once and remove everybody and you have a clean slate, and then build whatever you want, you can build to a much more affluent market and market to a much more affluent tenant and make a lot more money. And not only are you going to be able to make money off increased rents, but the value, the property values is where they really make bank. The property value, because the rents increase, the property value increases exponentially, and then Timber Creek can take loans off that to invest and increase and make money in other ways. And so there's a huge incentive to do exactly what Timber Creek is, a huge market incentive to do exactly what Timber Creek did, and evict everybody and start marketing to more affluent white people. And they're doing this not just by creating luxury apartments, but I mean in a very direct way, by naming the using the name Vista Local, and explicitly marketing to people in Alta Vista. Alta Vista is 80% white. It's 80% white. It's much more affluent, and they're intentionally marketing to a much more affluent white market that they intend to attract after having removed the racialized tenants, right? Like, it's a very, and they can say all they want, no, we don't intend this, maybe, in a really, really wild world, like it kind of, sometimes when they make that argument, like this, it's, what kind of fantasy land is this where you don't know what you're doing? but of course they do, and they're going to make an enormous amount of money doing it. And even when you look at their, we found this when you look at their marketing materials, the people in the marketing materials are white. They're comfortable. They look more affluent. They're typically older. It's clearly marketed towards the demographic that prevails in Alta Vista, right? So there's even this really direct link that I think in this case gives us a real fighting chance at winning. How much? I know I'm going over the 10 minutes, but Yavar and Josh didn't take, or sorry, Yavar and Nick didn't take so much time. Am I still good for time? So I'm just getting into it. I'm just getting started. I'm just kidding. So that's the argument that we're making. We've lined up really good experts. We have expert reports coming out that are coming along. I'm very excited about. We already have one expert report that's just phenomenal from a very, very well respected urban geographer who's going to testify essentially to what I've just explained. We have a really good shot. I mean, we're up against, a $16 billion company, right? We got some legal aid funding, and the Herongate Tenant Coalition is fundraising. But it's a $16 billion company. They are and we're threatening their biggest asset. So, we have to be prepared for a fight. But the significance that people, I can't emphasize enough how significant this case could be when you look at the really, really pathetic and disappointing law of the right to housing and housing law across Canada. If we win and the tribunal agrees that this is a discriminatory practice, that this type of practice where a racialized community is targeted in this way, if the Human Rights Tribunal agrees that with us, it could establish a precedent that any developer that moves into a community like this and makes a big acquisition has to work with incumbent residents, has to accommodate them, to use the term of art. In ways like doing phased demolitions where residents can, move around and without leaving their community, where residents get, assistance with that move, where residents don't have to pay increased rents even when they do move within the community, things like that, where they'd actually have to work with the community to prevent the dissolution and the expulsion that the current residents have faced, and these very serious consequences that go with that, right? We all know what it's like to be uprooted, but imagine being uprooted from such a tight-knit community that you're dependent on, that you have these really strong social bonds with. No one likes to move. But I certainly wouldn't want to move from a community like that, like Herongate, which is why so many people are fighting. So it's a really potentially very significant precedent that could go a long way towards establishing a right to housing, towards preventing this kind of systemic discrimination in housing. And so it's a very significant case. We have a long way to go. We've had some victories. There was an early attempt by Timber Creek they made a motion to stay the proceeding, meaning they were trying to get the tribunal to stop the proceeding pending the outcome of the small claims court matters. Luckily, we were successful in having that motion dismissed. But unfortunately, the major impediment right now is the pandemic. we're all lined up to go. We haven't stopped. We've been, working on things slowly. All of our documents are in order pretty much. We have, we've been lining up our experts, but right now the big impediment is the pandemic and the huge backlog at the tribunal. Unfortunately, the Ford government has eviscerated the tribunal, and they don't have enough staff. They don't have enough adjudicators. They fired adjudicators and didn't reappoint them. And so we're facing the consequences of that. So things are moving along slowly. But we're getting there, and I'm hopeful. We have requested to get things started again. We made a request a little while ago to get things started again, and have a meeting with the tribunal and opposing counsel and try to establish a new timeline. Haven't heard back yet. Hopefully we hear something in the new year. This is going to take another couple of years probably before we have a decision. There's going to be a lot of evidence, a lot of witnesses. It'll probably be a couple of weeks, a week or two maybe of hearings in the end. But I'm very optimistic. I'm very excited about this case. And, I think, I think there's a really good chance that we win this. So, yeah, there you go.
Amazing. Thanks, Daniel. Yavar, is there anything you wanted to add?
Only just to echo Daniel's comments in terms of how the force of organizing has really brought this together, with the number of applicants, evidence that we've been that we've had in terms of their allegations, and bringing this as like a community type of application. So the scope of it is large, the implications are large, the demographics that we're dealing with are large, but also, as with our other cases, we have phenomenal experts, and the social science evidence, as Daniel's saying, it's where a lot of the great academic work that friends and allies are working on is able to make a difference in the legal sphere. So for me, this is really among the most interesting and innovative kinds of cases, because we're using human rights for what it's meant to do. Recently, I threw my hat in the ring, and I stood for becoming an MP in West Nepean. And one of the big issues on the political sphere was housing. It was a massive issue for all the politicians, but there is such a gap. I can say from experience in terms of what the politicians will promise, what they can promise, and what's happening on the ground. And so there's very few cases that really get to the nub of the issue, where we're dealing with housing as a human right. So that's something that some of the parties talk about, not enough politically, but just making housing really a human right. I think that's what this case is about, and that's so incredibly important.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Daniel mentioned, we're still doing fundraising. So the fundraising link is posted in the chat. A fourth year Carleton sociology class has been helping organize this. So big shout out to them. You'll see some of them as like mods and co-hosts.
Yes, thank you very much for all your work to Josh's class. Yeah.
You guys.
Yeah, so if there are any comments, any questions, I don't think you can unmute yourself now. I think we're dealing with a few trolls at the beginning. But if you have any questions, maybe just raise your hand or write your name in the chat and we'll unmute you. I know we went through the slides like pretty quickly because to get through stuff. Yeah, there's a question from Greg. Can you unmute yourself? Oh, sorry. You have to do it again. There you go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation, first of all. I am most senior professor on campus. I've been teaching here for 46 years in a row. And I'm professor of architecture, and I am currently involved with the third year studio that we're dealing with these issues. I come from the Middle East. I have been in Soviet Union. I've been in all over the world per se. Housing is not uniquely Canadian issue, but there are certain kind of rights in countries like Syria, where the tenant has the right to stay there as long as the tenant wants, and no power is there to kick the tenant out. The only way they could do is to sell the unit to the tenant. That's all what they could do. All what I'm hearing from you will not materialize to any substantial results per se. Yeah, you are just playing with gimmickry as it relates to politicians, what they promise and what they never deliver. I think the grassroots should be that if housing is a sort of human rights issue, then that issue should be part of the parliament sort of debate and taking a position, whether it is a right or it's not. And that once that right becomes a manifested kind of reality, in the sense that whoever really rents any space, by the time over time about its usefulness of that premises, the one who rents the space actually is contributing, it's refunding to the owner that money, whatever that cost was originally speaking. Either that, or you will never allow any rental space, first of all, in any city. Look what happens to the situation. I think you really have to take these extreme positions as opposed to somewhere in the middle, that juggling and doing all kinds of gimmickry, and then you win a case and you lose the other one and so on. These are not solutions at all. Either it's a right, it should be there in the Constitution, and no one could play games with it. Otherwise, you would say that no rental spaces should be there. No one is allowed to build and rent. Look what happens to the market. I think drastic sort of position should be articulated, and you have to win the support of the constituents across the board. Then you will get something out of that. Otherwise, with all good intentions, and they are wonderful people, but being all over the world, knowing all kinds of problems, for example, even in New York City, you could not kick out the spaces where someone stayed over there for 15, 20 years unless you sell the unit. You have no choice to sell the unit to the person who's dwelling there. I think those are the things that you really have to talk about, and not really making a case whether Premier Ford is this or someone else is that. You have to have much better position articulation to really make this part of, truly speaking, the right to own a dwelling premise, at least the right to have one, whether by rent or whatever it is. As I said, I've been member of the Board of Governors at Carleton University and at all levels of university system. So I know how the whole thing is run. As well, I have been member of Canadian UNESCO Commission Science Division and dealt with 192 countries globally speaking. And I am really advising a lot of universities how to reshape their programs and so on, you name it. But I think what I'm hearing and what I'm understanding from you guys, this is very much something that the current kind of establishment likes to see. That's what it is. It works for them, not for you. So you're getting a little bit compassion here, a little bit compassion there, and so on. Eventually, at the end, you always are the loser. And that's something that has to bring a whole new attitude towards what this issue is and what kind of fundamental change. And it should be part of the Constitution that people, and that's the human right to have a dwelling space, regardless what is you own it, you rent it, and so on. Thank you. If I upset anybody, please.
No, honestly, I can field this one because I would be the first to agree that I think your characterization of what of the legal cases is exactly on point. I totally agree, actually, and this is the difficulty we face, and as lawyers and as a lawyer that wants to, that looks towards a better world, as personally as a socialist and someone that believes that housing is a human right, it is very frustrating that you do really feel like sometimes you're it's like you're running around in the Titanic with a soldering iron, and you're just kind of plugging the little holes here and there when the whole ship is sinking, right? And I think that that's right. And you're right to point out, like, we're kind of, we have to make these kind of difficult arguments, and because we are operating, the legal, as lawyers, we're operating within the system that is designed to facilitate development, right? Like the Residential Tenancies Act is designed to facilitate development. The Human Rights Code does put some constraints on that, but ultimately we're operating in a system that is designed to facilitate capitalism, capital development, and this is what the product of that is. And I totally agree with that. And I think ultimately, and I say this to many clients and groups of clients, ultimately the only real effective mechanism for change is organizing. Is actual people organizing to take power and enact a law. When you have the power over the laws themselves, to enact the laws themselves, that's what's going to,
I think the laws have to change. The laws, Medicare seemed to be impossible. Look what happened.
Yeah, you can only nudge things, right? Like as a lawyer, you can only nudge things along. And what we'd really like to see is housing be recognized as a constitutional right, like you're saying, much more radical, and things that speak to people, things that people can rally around. I totally agree with that. I think that and there's a lot of debate about how to achieve that, and that's kind of beyond the scope of, I guess, what we're talking about. I think the only difference, it's really, we're talking about this legal case, and to me though, and this is maybe where I disagree with you, is sometimes the legal cases can serve a larger purpose as and bolster that larger movement. They can energize people. They can help move things along. If people have some protection, if racialized communities have some kind of protection from this predatory form of development, it gives them something to defend themselves with and to build their own power. I don't have any pretensions to being able to affect major change through the legal system, right? Like, it's really through the political process that real change is going to come. And so I always tell people that, like, it's always this conversation, is our resources better spent on the legal case or, organizing, or is there some value? And it's a very hard decision to make. In this case, I can tell you the legal case had a really positive effect. It wasn't too long after we started making threats that Timber Creek said, no more evictions unless we have a place for you to move, right? And guaranteed residents the right to, at least that's what they announced, to move within the community when their unit was slated for demolition, to a unit at the same rent. That's what they were announcing in the early days. And then they came out, initially Timber Creek had no plans whatsoever to make this an affordable, to have any affordability component. Now, I mean, we know as was just described, the affordability component is a sham, but before it was 100%, so there's at least some gains that people can rally behind, and fight for something. Because when you have nothing, when you're, it gives some hope, and I think there is some value to that. But yeah, I definitely take your point.
Well, I practice in Lebanon. Still, I have my practice there. I do all of my work from here. And there is a law over there in Lebanon, in Beirut, that when you really demolish a rental place, you have to reconstruct high-rise buildings. That's basically what happens for profit. But you have to provide the same environment, the same area-wise for each one that you kick out.
Yes.
They have to come back.
Yeah.
That's in the law. You cannot do anything else. So it means when you're going to be taking 1-2-story sort of setting, whatever they are, and you're going to be building high-rise buildings, you can go as high as you want.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. I think, Yavar, did you have something to respond, or should I move on to other questions?
Do you want me to respond, or
if I could, I don't want to monopolize here, but just this whole debate about whether there should be political intervention or legal intervention, I disagree with Greg, your point respectfully, in the sense that there needs to be action for communities that want to resist and want to resist now. I don't think this is gimmickry. I think this is about resistance that's happening in this moment. So I think there's an inherent value to it. Whatever might happen or not happen to it, it's part of the struggle. The other thing to say, that largely speaking, that through the political process, there can be some resolution. What I can say is that we've gone through the biggest housing crisis, certainly in this century, in recent memory, and our federal government and all levels of government knew the causes of it. There was no political will and there was no political momentum to do anything about that. So I think that part of what we're talking about here is we're talking about communities mobilizing and people in all of their expertise, you included and others, finding ways to organize with them. So I think the strategy is right on point. And what we're doing is we're trying to find innovative ways to engage. The political process is far behind, and we need to push that. We need to push that through whatever means are available. So I think that this is not certainly the ultimate solution, but it is something that is responding to a crisis where it's at, and it's using the expertise and the innovation of people that we're working in tandem with.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good luck with you guys. You don't want to hear, you don't want to take a position, a gutsy, strong position, then you're going to be played in the people, and they're going to be using whatever way you're going to be really victimizing yourself, because you will not going to be eventually succeeding.
All right,
good luck.
You. We're going to move on to other questions.
Good luck.
Yeah, great. Thank you. We appreciate it. Now we have to move on. Randy, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for this. I guess my questions are kind of in a similar vein, kind of going off of some of the stuff that Daniel was saying as well. I'm also a legal professional and a community organizer. And one of the things I really struggle with is this tension between that you were discussing a little bit about when to take legal action. And sometimes I find it can be a very mobilizing thing, and sometimes I can find it be a demobilizing thing. So I want to hear from some of the organizers about your experiences, like engaging in these big kind of test litigations, such as the Human Rights Tribunal, and like what your experience has been with it being mobilizing and maybe also demobilizing as well at times.
Tammy or Nima, do you want to? Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously very time consuming. I would say it depends on the context. Like in this situation, because of the makeup of the neighborhood and the documentation and the fact that there were, a bunch of tenants who were evicted in 2018 who wanted to continue the fight, that it was plausible and it was sort of feasible to do so. But I think generally it's just not, like the legal system is not set up for tenants. In other avenues, like in other situations with other groups of tenants, like this is just not a possibility. You just can't make this argument, even though it's wrong. People are going to end up homeless. They're going to be paying hundreds of dollars more in rent. There's just no, avenue through the legal system. I mean, that already, but yeah, I think Herongate is a specific situation that can't necessarily be used as a model, an organizing model or a legal model in other situations. We just sort of have to take it for what it is, the demographic makeup of the neighborhood. And of course, there are other neighborhoods like Herongate across the province. So that's what Daniel's saying, is that this, if we're successful, it could have sort of more structural implications, especially if the Human Rights Commission gets involved, that do apply to other neighborhoods like this. But yeah, it's just extremely time consuming. We've been lucky that we've had a lot of good people who have dedicated a lot of time towards this, and the documentation has been solid. But yeah, I mean, there's like Andy has his hand raised as well. Like there's a body of academic literature that's developed around Herongate as well. There's, a whole media storm that's developed around Herongate. So it really is just trying to like attack it from as many angles as possible and put as much pressure on the landlord as possible.
Yeah, I that's what I would echo, is that in terms of the way that the legal cases influence the organizing, is when we have the support of when we're working with a team of lawyers, and we have that support, it's, for me, I feel more secure in doing the organizing work because I know I have guidance, right? I have the guidance of these professionals, right? In this way. So yeah, that's a way that I think that it reinforces that it contributes positively, very much so, to the organizing, I think, so.
If I could just add something maybe to, Josh has had, Josh has been involved in other, other housing things that, and others probably have as well, that have been very successful. It's a strategic decision in every case, where do resources go, human and financial resources. And sometimes, and I think it's the role of lawyers to, especially lawyers in our position, working with community organizations to advise, to say, look, this is what you're going to achieve, like in the courtroom and in the tribunal, or this is, what the likely outcome is, or what's possible. And I often tell, like I was saying before, I often tell people, but you can really get much more significant results from organizing. But sometimes the legal side can help garner that media attention that ends up helping the organizers get bring that public pressure to bear on a landlord, and there's other cases I've been involved in, and Josh has been involved in as well, where, the landlords have, because of the pressure, the public pressure that was brought, and because of the organizing efforts, they were offering significantly more than the legal, significantly more than what was legally required, and anything that we possibly could have achieved legally. And in those cases, like the legal strategy and the organizing strategy worked, complemented and reinforced each other, and just ended up with phenomenal results. But yeah, in other cases, and it's just so hard, right? Like Randy, you make a really good point. Like it's just hard to tell in any case. My perspective is it's always up. It's always up to the organizers and the people actually affected. My job is to just tell them, like, this is what you're going to achieve if you, dump resources into, into the legal case, and if you focus on that. But you might achieve more if you win, if you organize, right? And I think people then decide that democratically amongst themselves. All you could do as a legal professional is advise them on what their rights are and the likely outcomes of a legal course of action, right? But if that advice is informed by a realistic appraisal of what's also achievable through organizing, then I think you're giving good advice. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on that point, but it's a very good question.
Thank you, everyone. That's a lot of food for thought there. Thanks.
Emily?
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, everyone, for all the time you put into this and for your presentations. It's very inspiring. I'm a tenant in Hamilton, and have been very inspired by the work that y'all have been doing. I just wanted to, say I share your frustrations. There's a legal case that has been ongoing, kind of residual from a rent strike here back in 2018 that still has not been resolved. And I don't really see the point of it, but at least in that case, we had the support of the legal aid, like the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic. And I think it's pretty sad that you guys have had to do all this on your own, fundraising and finding independent lawyers. That's, a burden that you shouldn't have to bear. But yeah, I wanted to ask about what's happened to all of the people who were displaced in the first round of evictions and demolition, and where are they living now? Are you still connected with those people? And how have you continued to organize with the people who remain in the neighborhood? What has that been like during the pandemic? And what are kind of the strengths of your tenant committee as you see it, and what are some of the vulnerabilities with Timber Creek, and what kind of power do you hold?
There's a few people in the Zoom meeting who are part of the human rights case. If they want to talk, they can just message me, I guess. But we're just still, organizing. That is obviously the main strategy to fight the evictions. It's not going to be won through any sort of legal case or anything like that, fighting the next round, the next phases of demolition. It'll have to be through organizing. So there's no shortcut to door knocking. There's no shortcut to talking to neighbors and having meetings and doing that. So that's really the nitty gritty of it.
Hi, Emily. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, you go ahead, Nima. I've
Okay, thank you. Emily, great to connect with you. Sending so much love and power to your struggle in Hamilton as well, because all of this is super interconnected. To answer your question about the first couple phases of demoviction and whether we're in contact with people, so the first phase was in 2016 and the HTC formed in 2018. And I remember when the evictions happened in 2016, I had like a good chunk of neighbors who did have to find new housing. A lot of them ended up moving to Fairley or Hetherington, which is a neighborhood that's very close by, that's under a different landlord. But other folks, they did have to go into more precarious housing situations that, you know, had higher rents, instability in terms of whether or not they were sure they were going to be able to stay in that housing for long periods of time. 2018, when we were organizing in the second phase of eviction, and that's where we really got our start, getting to like form a tenant coalition. I would say that most of those folks, I would say all of them found somewhere to live, but they received no help from the property management company. If they did, it was very, very minimal, and it was like a 20-year-old showing like 5 families, 1 unit at the same time, and kind of making like a crabs in a barrel type scenario, which was really unfortunate and also speaks to the level to the dynamics that are at play here. But we'll be seeing, you know, increasing organizing hopefully in the next few months and getting back into touch with folks, because COVID really did bring our numbers down, and we really struggled to find a way to be able to connect with people safely and in a way that really was helpful to anyone's material reality. We tried to do a rent strike for a period of time. We did like a keep your rent thing with folks connected across Algonquin territory, and yeah, it's picking up slowly. We're getting back into the swing of things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of, yeah, I don't know. Sorry. Yeah, it's like Josh said, there's no sort of shortcut for door knocking, right? And the pandemic has been a real impediment to that. And so, and Herongate was very, very hard hit by the pandemic. We've been a hotspot basically the entire time for the city. So yeah, that's been a real challenge for us. But I am gaining more hope as time goes on. And I'm very much focused on sort of like collective bargaining, right? Like, okay, so this is going to happen. How are we going to protect ourselves? Like, how are we going to sort of make this as good for us as possible, right? So, yeah.
But yeah, your other question was, where did people go? People are paying, or after 2018, the new places they moved to, a lot of people just ended up paying hundreds of dollars more a month. So the previous place I was living, one family, Nepali family who got evicted, moved in next door to me. And in Herongate, they were paying like $1,400. When they moved in next door to me, they were paying $1,900 or over $1,900 plus utilities and all that. So for a smaller place. So like they just have to deal with it, right? They just have to find another job, or if they have kids in high school, send the kids to work and to help pay for rent. Life just gets harder. Already hard life gets even harder.
Yeah, well, so there was, in our presentation, there was this slide where they mentioned that the pool of low wage workers increases. And one of the reasons that it increases is because the rent has increased. So people are now desperate to pay their rent. And so they'll take whatever job they have to take. You know, there's sort of like this unstated reality underneath that sort of underlies that, right? That there are more low wage workers available because people are desperate to pay their rent because the rents are so high. So.
Very, very true. Daniel, did you want to say something?
No, I was just agreeing.
Okay, Andy, want to go?
Yes, hi everyone. Thanks to the coalition, the legal team, sociology class for all your hard work. It's really great. To Emily's question too, I would also say I remember speaking with family members at an event in the community who had moved to Orleans. And I don't know if you know where that is. Ottawa is massively geographic. There's suburbs that are really far from the city center, like a couple dozen kilometers. So I think that when families get pushed out too, they're forced to go to where rents are similar or even probably higher. But Orleans is just so far removed, and other suburbs like Barrhaven and Canada, Stittsville. So I think that when families are pushed out of the the city center or close to the surrounding city center, that's kind of where they're forced to go, which is really far removed from their, as Daniel was saying, their social bonds and the community connections. My question, I was going to direct it to Daniel, if you would. So I'm interested if someone could speak to like the role of the city of Ottawa in all of this, because after all, they're named in the human rights case. So I'm a student. I've been sitting in on city meetings over the last few months. There's been a ton of meetings. There's the Herongate official plan amendment. There's the new official plan. They're creating this vision of development and growth for the city for the next 50 years. And part of that's the Herongate official plan amendment. So there's been like a planning committee meeting, open house, city council. And so I'm interested in a couple of things. The language they deploy, such like older language such as renewal, newer language such as revitalization when they're talking about Herongate. But what has struck me too is when more progressive councillors, city councillors, and members of the planning committee are challenging Timber Creek's or Hazelview's proposal, they're met very defensively by members of the city staff, more so than the mayor. I mean, the mayor does his thing and the councillors do their thing, but it's more so the planning staff that are really, they seem dumbfounded or they get really defensive that people challenge, that there's any challenge to Timber Creek's proposal for Herongate. Like, this is like it's like these developers are going way beyond what they're required to do. They're, we should give them everything they want, So it's really me. I'm interested in these dynamics, the city dynamics too. Obviously interested in the tactics that the landlord has deployed, but the city is named in the human rights case. So I'm wondering about the legal perspectives in naming them. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Andy, and thanks so much for your ongoing support. Andy's done a lot of work and been involved since the beginning. Yeah, it's funny. I don't even talk about I don't even get on the city, and I totally missed it in my in my what I said earlier. But they are the allegation as Andy pointed out, is the allegation in our application is that the city was complicit and has been complicit, and it's complicit in a number of ways. In one of the primary ways is that it's no secret that that housing was being allowed to dilapidate, right? Like anyone that drives by, there were dozens of bylaw officer visits, issuing orders, and even at one point the mayor threatened the prior landlord, what was it, Transglobe. Whoever chose that name, really, but whoever, but when Transglobe owned it, they bought it from Minto in the 2000s, and they immediately started to fall into a state of disrepair, not beyond repair. It's never been beyond repair, but allowed to dilapidate in a very obvious way where you just walk around. And so, if you're the city, like the city's responsible for, or at least partly responsible legally for enforcing housing standards, right? And here we have a situation where dozens of city officials are going by this neighborhood with blinders on, ignoring, for over many years, ignoring the very obvious dilapidation that's being allowed to transpire. And so that's one kind of way the city is complicit. The other way that the city is complicit is that the city actually ultimately has approval authority over these developments, as we know. And yet it is so, like, as Annie pointed out, it is so, so uninspired, so timid, and spineless. I mean, not that they don't want to fight it, right? And that's the thing is, I think they believe in this type of renewal or revitalization, because what the perspective that they're looking at it from is they're not looking at it from as though the people living there are resident or are human beings who have lives and social connections and whose lives have meaning. They're looking at a neighborhood as though it were infrastructure. And even worse, they're looking at it, and I think this is what taints city officials largely. Their job, I think they largely view their job as getting property values up, and because that's where the city's primary source of revenue is property value. I'm sure there are other sources of revenue, but in terms of taxation power, that's what the cities have. They don't, in Canada, we don't have income tax. Cities can't impose income taxes and things like that. So they view their job, those city planners, as increasing, and they have this really distorted picture. Oh, well, if they go in and invest all this money and the property values go up, then property taxes will go up, and then we can do all these other great things. But it never works like that, because you're always getting less for that increase in taxation revenue, and it's always going to cost more to replace the housing that was lost, through whatever, or subsidize new, you're just never going to get back what Herongate was by investing the additional tax revenue, whatever it is, somewhere else, and creating new housing or investing in community. And so you just end up losing all the time, losing more and more housing, and housing prices go up and up, despite the fact that more units are being built. And so the city is complicit, it's failing to use its powers to regulate this development. I mean, they have a lot of leverage here, right? Like they could make, what an opportunity to make Herongate into to have the infrastructure match the vibrancy and the value of the community there, and for the residents to, and to improve the living conditions of the actual existing residents. They have approval authority over this development, and yet they're refusing to exercise it. They did not even look at what the effect would be on the social and racial composition of the community would be. Human rights did not even factor into their assessment. It's nowhere in the reports. It's a very antiquated, very regressive way to view development as something that's revenue generating, is something that's going to, improve the physical infrastructure of a neighborhood without regard to the impact on the actual people that live there, right? And so that's those are some of the ways. I can't remember, Annie, you asked, maybe there was a couple of questions in there that maybe others will field, but those are my thoughts on the city's involvement in this case. It's just a very, very weak and uncaring attitude towards a racialized community and a lower income community. And then what happens? They just keep getting pushed further and further away from the city core, dispersed across the city. And then we lose such a vibrant, and we lose that neighborhood, right? And those neighborhoods like Herongate, they add so much value, not just to the existing residents, but also to, what would Ottawa be like without a Chinatown, without a Little Italy, right? Like this is exactly the same thing. It's a very natural thing for newcomers to want to live in close proximity to one another, where they can support each other. And when we lose those communities, we lose something very valuable as a community as a whole as well. And the city's just doesn't look at it like that. So yeah, I'm very, very critical of the city's part in this whole saga.
Tammy or Nima, would you like to add anything?
I mean, I just think that, yeah, like the city has failed to account for non-capital value that exists in a community, right? Like not all value that a community has is related to money. It's not just about that. So, yeah.
Yeah, for another, for the Sandy Hill, the Osgood Street property that was mentioned in the presentation, tenants fundraised and they wanted to hire a third-party inspector, a private building inspector to go in. And he did. And the inspector they hired used to be a bylaw property standards bureaucrat with the city, inspector with the city. And he said the standards have gone down incredibly. So as we know, all law is interpretive. You can make of it what you want, really. I mean, you can say that there are sort of like boundaries, but within that, you can pick and choose how you interpret the law. And the City of Ottawa bylaw inspectors, property inspectors are following their own bylaws, but also the Building Code Act. And they're interpreting it right now at a very, very low level. And the inspector that these tenants hired was shocked that bylaw would let a building fall into this level of disrepair when bylaw officers were coming there quite regularly. And what were they writing about? What were they writing work orders for? Mostly graffiti. That's it. Probably because of the homeowners in Sandy Hill, professors and doctors and diplomats, but the actual condition of the units, I mean, we were standing there with tenants in Sandy. I mean, this all happened in Herongate too, but in Sandy Hill, a bylaw officer was there on the sidewalk in front of the property, and a tenant went up to him and said, "I do not have heat." And the bylaw officer told him, "Call 311. He is 311. Like, it's so bad. The city is very, very complicit in all of this. They know they are. We saw in the presentation, again, September 8th, they amend the MOU. They add little, extra little language to make it better for, a better deal. But it's still for demolition. And then the city announces a record amount for affordable housing. This cycle just repeats itself. But yeah, I'll wrap up. So are there any other questions, any other comments? It was recorded. This whole thing was recorded, so it'll go up on the YouTube channel. Again, we're fundraising. The fundraising link is in the chat. Please donate if you can. Anything helps. Because the cases are so ongoing, it just consumes the fund.
Yeah, thanks for listening to everything we had to say. And yeah.
Thank you all so much for coming tonight. And we hope to see you at future events if we can have them in person too. Thank you, Daniel and Yavar and Nick, and thank you everyone, the law students, for helping us out. Thank you so much. Or not law students, Josh's sociology students.
That's right.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much.